are we good to go? Great.
Yes. Just a reminder for you to record, Tammy.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Yep.
So
All right.
welcome to New Mexico News. Last event, we can't believe it, already for 2021. So we really appreciate so many people subscribing to this event today. We're very excited actually to present this topic of happiness and the art of flourishing. So we'll try to get to that as quickly as possible. Just a few things. I'd like to introduce New Mexico New. Paula Getz, who is driving our Zoom meeting today, is the one of the co-founders, including myself, Tammy Stocker. And we kicked New Mexico New off earlier this year with offering these learning events, kind of a soft launch to invite members of the New Mexican community in who are 50 plus to join us and begin building community. So that's been our primary mission this year. But I also want to mention that our biggest goal for next year is to develop an app and launch that to the community that we hope will connect people to work and volunteer opportunities. So we'll be out working really hard to not only fundraise to develop this app as a nonprofit, but also to meet people in the community, businesses, small businesses, startup businesses, nonprofits, to encourage an age-friendly environment to hire people who are 50 to 70 plus. So that's really the crux of what drives NMNU beyond the community, of course, and wanting to just bring people together who are experiencing transitions in their life, maybe going from a lifelong career and looking for that next chapter. Maybe it's not work. If it's not work, that's fine too, because our intention of building the community is to provide learning events like this one and to provide social engagement as well. So it's a multi-purpose, ultimately, platform that we want to encourage people to join us in building this. So with that in mind, we would also like to invite your ideas about topics for these learning events. And we're really pretty open. We would prefer to engage around topics that you guys care about or are interested in learning more about. So if you have some ideas, we would love it today if you would just drop those in the chat box or email them to us. Many of you also sent some ideas around your thoughts with the survey that we mailed out. So thank you for those. I got those this morning. So I guess our big push right now, as we all know, 'tis the season for fundraising. And so we're also looking to increase our fundraising initiative. And if you know of businesses or organizations that you believe would get behind what we're doing, we would really love to know about them and invite everyone to join us today to help bring this idea of developing our app to life. That's our big goal. So without further ado, I'd like to let you guys know about Teen Years. Dylan, I believe you're here as our coach. Thank you so much for being here. Teen Years is based here in Albuquerque, and they provide services for seniors. So if you have any technology issues, they are the go-to source for getting some help. And today, Dylan is here. If you have a technical issue, you can just send her a little note in the chat box and she will help you out. So thanks, Dylan. We appreciate you guys being here. We love partnering with Teen Years. We're all about that multi-generational approach to being age-friendly. So thank you. I also want to say thanks to Ellen Raganini. Ellen works with New Mexico New, and she will also be here. So if you have any questions about New Mexico New, Ellen may be the one responding to you. So thanks, Ellen, for being here. She's with us all the way from Baja, Mexico today. So we can all be a little envious of her beautiful view. I also want to mention that we're going to keep everyone muted so that we have a good quality to our recording today. This video will be recorded and available on New Mexico News YouTube channel. We'll post that link in the chat in a bit. And if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll have access to all of our videos that we have recorded since July this year. And we would love to have more subscribers. So if we can get up to 100 subscribers, we can do a lot more with our channel, as many of you probably know. So please subscribe and follow us as well on social media. Our handle across all platforms is NM New Elder World. So if you're searching for us, if you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, we're on all of those channels. I'd also like to just mention how today's presentation is going to go. We're first going to allow the presenters to just do the presentation. So if you would hold your questions until the end, that would be very helpful. You're certainly welcome to type a question in chat as we go through the presentation, but we'll be waiting until the end to ask to give the presenters any questions for the topic today. We do want to encourage you to ask questions at the end, and we'll let you know when we're ready to get started with the Q&A. So with that, I think I will just say that it has been an absolute delight to get to work with Drs. Steve Poland and Paul Smith. Thank you both so much for all that you've done to get prepared for this event today after we've been meeting them for the last couple of weeks. It's very exciting and can't really wait to hear what they have to say today and have had the opportunity to have a little bit of a glimpse at their presentation. And I just think it's great information. So I know they're going to tell you about their backgrounds. So I'll let them tell you more and we'll just dive right into it and get started. So take it over, you guys.
Great. Thank you very much, Tammy. It's wonderful to be here. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us today. Steve Poland and me, Paul Smith, for today's presentation, which is Happiness and the Art of Flourishing. And to give you a little bit of a sneak preview, there's a lot more than just happiness involved in flourishing. We'll get into that shortly, but we're going to start by having Steve introduce himself. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, looking back, and I'm so happy to be here today with everyone. And I think we're going to find ways to continue to flourish one way or another through what we share. I've realized as I look back on my career that I've been passionate about health and well-being from the start. After living and working on the Navajo Reservation in the 1970s, helping start an educational program for mentally handicapped Navajos, I earned my PhD from the University of Minnesota. I returned to New Mexico and worked as a school psychologist for over 20 years, helping my students be more successful in their educational programs. After retiring from this work, I broadened my focus to working with adults. I taught classes on the pursuit of happiness through the Division of Continuing Education at the University of New Mexico, and I've continued to teach classes on flourishing and resilience through the Osher Lifelong Learning Program. I'm so grateful that my career as a psychologist has allowed me to flourish by pursuing my lifelong passion for enhancing well-being. And Paul?
Thank you, Steve. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I am not formally trained in psychology. I have a number of college degrees, including a PhD from Cornell University in engineering. I worked at Sandia National Laboratories as a scientist, a business negotiator, and a manager for 28 years. And I came to positive psychology because I was depressed and anxious. And a psychologist suggested that I look into it. And I found it incredibly helpful, not only for myself, but I also brought it to other people at Sandia. Eventually, a number of us began to teach positive psychology there, not as part of a formal program at Sandia, but as something that we developed as a grassroots program. And we, over the course of about 4 years, brought that to almost 400 Sandians. So I saw it help not only myself, but individuals and teams. And I feel very lucky that I'm giving this presentation because I retired 2 years ago. It's been an interesting time being retired just as the lockdown for COVID began. And doing this presentation has pointed out some things that I can share with you, but also some things that's helped me see that I haven't done very well. And so it's helping me improve. My current focus is on bringing positive psychology to a broader audience. And so I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here too. Thanks. Steve?
Yes, as we begin this presentation of happiness and flourishing, it's important to know that the approach Paul and I take is informed by science. There are many pundits and self-help books that promise to bring you happiness. And the problem is, how do we know if there's any evidence to back them up? The suggestions we provide today are backed up by scientific studies. But one of the pioneers in the scientific study of happiness is Ed Diener. Back in the 1980s in graduate school, he wanted to study the happiness of farm workers. His professor said there was no way to scientifically study happiness. And anyway, who thought farm workers would be happy? Ed was not to be deterred, and he began the study of happiness by measuring satisfaction with life. Take a few moments to consider how you'd answer the items on the scale. For each item, the score ranges from 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree. There are 5 items, so the total scores range from a low of 5 to a high of 35. According to Ed, scoring in the range of 30 to 35 indicates you are highly satisfied with your life. People who score in this range love their lives. They feel that things are going very well. However, just because the person is satisfied with their life doesn't mean she or he is complacent. In fact, growth and challenge, as we are going to suggest today, might be part of the reason the respondent is satisfied. A score in the range of 20 to 24 is in the average range. The majority of people in economically developed nations score in this range. They are generally satisfied, but have some areas where they very much like improvement. So now that we've seen how happiness can be measured, Paul will tell us why it's important.
Yeah, and my computer is not going to the next slide. There we go. So the benefits of happiness. Thanks, Steve. So there are real benefits to being happier. A study was done on nuns who wrote basically a piece about themselves when they went into the convent. And then there was data in terms of how long those nuns lived. And they found that happier nuns had a mortality rate that was 2.5 times lower than people who were unhappy. They've also looked at immune function. They measured the happiness of people by surveys and then introduced cold virus into their nose and found that the people who were happier, which were much less likely to become sick. And so happiness is very important to our physical health. It's also important to our emotional health. And we bring this up because retirement can bring up stereotypes that tend to reduce our happiness, reduce the quality of our mood. Things like stopping work, losing your identity because of that, or feeling that you're at the beginning of just the end. And we would argue that that's not the case at all. In fact, positive attitudes towards aging increased lifespan by more than 7 years. And attitude had more impact than gender, socioeconomic status, and functional health. And by functional health, we mean things like blood pressure and cholesterol levels. So attitude is incredibly important. And what we're going to do today is we're going to follow along with some work that was started by Martin Seligman, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, Marty describes himself as kind of grouchy. And so when he began this work of how to have our best lives, how to really flourish, he wanted to create something that was more than just happyology, more than just the study of happiness. And so he coined the term flourishing to mean good well-being, to mean living our best lives. And so, Steve, can you tell us what that framework is that Marty developed?
Oh, yes, Paul. And so the 5 elements that Seligman believes contribute to well-being are positive emotions, engagement or flow, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. The acronym is PERMA. So you'll often hear his work referred to as PERMA theory. I couldn't think of a better way to show how these elements come together organically than to share the drawing my granddaughter Alex made for me. Her choice of a flower with its petals representing the elements of well-being is perfect. Each element has its unique aspects, and they come together to form a whole. I love that little sun peeking out from the center. When I'm with Alex or looking at her drawings, I experience all 5 elements of PERMA, the positive emotions of the love and affection I share with Alex and her parents, the sense of engagement I get when we talk about her passion for art, the sense of positive connection I have knowing her as an infant and seeing her grow. The sense of positive connection is something that continues, of course. And then the meaning I get from having her loving presence in my life, and the sense of accomplishment that comes from recognizing how hard I've worked to make sure that she has remained present as that I remained present to her as she grew up. And now let's go through each of the elements of PERMA in more detail and consider for each one how you can get more benefits from them in your life. So we're going to start with positive emotion. This is a picture, there's a picture here of Barbara Fredrickson. She's one of my favorite researchers in the field of positive psychology. Her research is focused on the question of why positive emotions are good for us. What adaptive significance have they for us in the course of human evolution? While it was clear that negative emotions help us survive life and death situations by triggering rapid responses like the fight or flight response to the sight of a snake or to a predator, the question remained, what is the function of positive emotions? Her answer is the Broaden and Build theory of positive emotion. She suggests that while negative emotions narrow our view of possible actions, positive emotions broaden them, and she has research to back this up. Positive emotions help us take in more information, and they operate over a longer time scale than negative emotions.
And so now we're going to hear from her.
Okay.
Positive emotions fundamentally change the way the human brain works. They allow us to take in more information, kind of widen our lens so we are able to see more in the periphery and to integrate that information in creative and integrative ways. And that is a temporary effect of positive emotions. That's what I call the broaden effect. That comes and goes as readily as a positive emotion comes and goes. But why that's important is that the more of these positive micro moments that you have, they're like nutrients. They accumulate and compound and help build your resources, build your resilience, build your reserves so that you become a better version of yourself. It propels us on a path of growth. And so that's what I call the build effect of positive emotions. These are happening at very different time scales. The broaden is a momentary effect. The build is long-term over weeks and months. So if our positive emotions are frequent in daily life, then we're setting ourselves up to be a better version of ourselves next season.
So these very fast, transient, short-lived emotions, we could miss them.
Oh, easily. In fact, we know from research that many times bad is stronger than good. Negative things just scream at us, and the positive are much more subtle, more like a whisper. And yet there's an interesting complementary asymmetry where positive emotions are much more frequent than negative emotions in people's daily lives, so long as you're not dealing with an affective disorder like depression or anxiety or chronic loneliness. But for most people, positive emotions outnumber their negative emotions. And so if we tune in, if we're more mindful, if we slow down and pay attention to the more subtle aspects of our experience, they're all over the place. Positive emotions.
There you go. Yeah. And so as Barbara Fredrickson pointed out, it's not just having those positive emotions, it's actually noticing them and experiencing them. But how many positive emotions do we really need? She did additional work and she found that 3 positive emotions that are really heartfelt and that we notice for every negative emotion that we experience is a tipping point. Now, this being a social science, others have found that the tipping point is not quite the same in all situations. John Gottman studied people who were married, and he looked at the things that they say to each other. And he found that 5 positive statements are required to counter 1 negative statement. Robert Schwartz also did some work, and he found that depressed people have ratios of about 0.5, whereas people who are really flourishing have a ratio of 4.3. So it's not exactly 3 to 1, but it's around that range. And the point is to notice those emotions. Don't just notice those positive emotions. Don't just think, oh, this is the way life ought to be, and go right on by. Take some time and notice that. And so some techniques for that. The first one that we're going to mention is called the 3 good things exercise. And this is where over the course of the day or at the end of the day, you write down 3 good things that happened. And you also write down either specifically what happened or how you can get more of that kind of good thing in your life. Or one thing that was developed in the training that I was involved with, we had people identify what PERMA variables that good thing was associated with. And if you do this over time, 2 weeks to a month, you'll start to see some patterns emerge that will help you be able to bring greater emotion into your life. Another thing that this does is that it has you looking for positive emotions over the course of the day. And that leads us into meditation. In particular, mindfulness meditation is about being more present and having your brain, the neuroplastic changes in your brain help you be more present and notice what's going on right now in the moment. And by doing that, you can also experience more positive emotions. Also, deepening the positive emotions is something that a savoring exercise can help with. If you've ever gone and looked at the sunset and just been in awe and looked at it because it is so beautiful, that's a savoring exercise. Just like taking time over a great meal or having a wonderful conversation with someone that you really care about. All of these are savoring those positive emotions. But just having those positive emotions isn't enough. Isn't that right, Steve?
Absolutely, Paul. And sometimes I think people think that we're telling them just to be positive, just to focus on the positive. And that's not what we're saying at all. Negative emotions are part of life and they need to be addressed. In fact, a key to coping with challenging situations is to be able to acknowledge the negative emotions, but don't get submerged by them, and be able to pick up those positive emotions. As Paul has pointed out, they tend to be very fragile, but they're there. Barbara Fredrickson, She did a study of college students who exhibited resilience, that stability to bounce back after a difficult experience, after 9/11. And the students who were most resilient and bounced back the best were the ones that could actually hold both the positive experiences, for instance, the bravery of the firefighters, the outpouring of support that we got as a nation from around the world, along with acknowledging the negative, which of course were there. So it's not ignoring, but it's the ability to manage to hold on to both positive and negative.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And now we're going to go on to engagement. This is often called flow, and this was developed by Mike or Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's shown here, and he's really not this gruff individual. I just thought this was an interesting picture of him. Csikszentmihalyi did work for many years, and he found that flow is an important part of well-being. And he'll tell you about what this is in more detail, but if you've ever gotten to the end of the day and had to pick up the phone and call a family member or a close friend and say, gosh, I'm really sorry, I lost track of time and I didn't mean to be late, that's flow. When you lose track of time, when you become one with the music, that's flow. So here's Csikszentmihalyi.
This is an interesting little quote from Masaru Ibuka, who was at that time starting out Sony without any money, without a product. They didn't have a product, they didn't have anything, but they had an idea. And the idea he had was to establish a place of work where engineers can feel the joy of technological innovation, be aware of their mission to society, and work to their heart's content. I couldn't improve on this as a good example of how flow enters the workplace. Now, when we do studies, we have, with other colleagues around the world, done over 8,000 interviews of people, from Dominican monks to blind nuns to Himalayan climbers to Navajo shepherds who enjoy their work. And regardless of the culture, regardless of education or whatever, there are these 7 conditions that seem to be there when a person is in flow. There's this focus that once it becomes intense, leads to a sense of ecstasy, a sense of clarity. You know exactly what you want to do from one moment to the other. You get immediate feedback. You know that what you need to do is possible to do, even though difficult. And sense of time disappears. You forget yourself. You feel part of something larger. And once those conditions are present, what you're doing becomes worth doing for its own sake.
And Paul, so one of the ways that I experience flow in my life is when I play tennis. But what happens when you no longer can play a game like tennis and need to give it up? My friend Paul loved tennis, but his knees were no longer able to handle the physical stress. His solution has been to find an alternative sport, pickleball, with a smaller court and paddle, and he loves it and looks forward each week to join his new friends. He still gets the challenge and the friendships similar to those he got from playing tennis. So we can modify and change what brings us engagement and flow as we age.
And the friend that Steve was talking about is not me. I've never been a tennis player. So how do we stay engaged? So Steve and I want to suggest that you look into your past. What has provided flow for you before? What were you doing? And what aspects of that activity created that engagement? What were the specifics that gave you flow? Just like not only looking at the positive emotions and avoiding the negative emotions, don't only look at the things that brought you flow, but look at the things that kept you from getting into flow. There are things that are frustrating or there are things that can make people anxious that can block flow. So you've had these experiences. Think about what they were. Now in retirement, you have the opportunity to search out those activities that maximize your engagement, minimize the frustration. You can engineer that part of your day so that you can stay engaged and be in flow. An important part of that is getting the right people around you, interacting with the right people to help you stay engaged and experience flow. And that leads us into positive relationships.
Yes,
Steve?
before we go there, I just wanted to give you a quote from Csikszentmihalyi. What he says is that a good conversation is like a jam session, where one starts with conventional elements and then introduces spontaneous variations that create an exciting new composition. So that does lead us right on into positive relationships. And Seligman calls these the socially connected life. Some people think, and I agree, that positive connection is probably the most important contributor of all of the elements that he's included in his PERMA model. Now, you might think, well, that's true for extroverts, but my gosh, what about for introverts? Maybe they prefer being by themselves. Well, Ed Diener, the guy we already mentioned, had a similar thought. He thought, well, maybe people who are introverted would be happier when they're by themselves. But when he did the experiment, he actually discovered that even introverts are happier when they're with other people. Not quite as much of a boost from being with people. And again, this is just on average. And there may be an introvert or so who doesn't feel that way. But just in general, introverts are happier when they're with people than when they are with alone. And also it's true that it's not just the number of connections, but it's the quality of those social connections that are very important. Going back to that quote of Csikszentmihalyi, if you can create these kinds of deep conversations where you're both learning things that you would not have known had you not had your conversation, then these elements really add so much depth to your life. And there is some evidence suggesting as we age, we tend to have fewer friends, but we have deeper connections with them. Of course, the other side of that is some of those friends may be dying as we get older. So it's good to have some younger friends too. Mix your palette with different ages. One of the people I think that I admire so much in terms of the research that he's doing on positive relationships is Robert Waldinger. And he's not the only person who's led this very famous Harvard study of adult development that began back in 1938, looking at some Harvard undergraduates and then some folks from working class neighborhoods in Boston. And they followed those same individuals continually. So at this point, there are still, out of the 724 they started with, somewhere around 60 are still alive. And what they found as the clearest lesson of the study is that good relationships keep us healthier and happier. And so we'll hear from Robert describing this research.
So this message that good, close relationships are good for our health and well-being, this is wisdom that's as old as the hills. Why is this so hard to get and so easy to ignore? Well, we're human. What we'd really like is a quick fix, something we can get that'll make our lives good and keep them that way. Relationships are messy and they're complicated, and the hard work of tending to family and friends, that's not sexy or glamorous. It's also lifelong. It never ends. The people in our 75-year study who were the happiest in retirement were the people who had actively worked to replace workmates with new playmates. Just like the millennials in that recent survey, many of our men, when they were starting out as young adults, really believed that fame and wealth and high achievement were what they needed to go after to have a good life. But over and over these 75 years, our study has shown that the people who fared the best were the people who leaned into relationships with family, with friends, with community.
And so our brains are actually wired for social connection. And retirement really provides an opportunity to change and enhance those relationships, like through working with New Mexico New. So some techniques that we have to suggest are acts of kindness. And these can be done, we're talking relatively small things, so that you can pepper your day with them. Things like thanking the person who checks you out at the grocery store, or letting somebody in traffic, or helping someone who's carrying things and has trouble getting through a door. These are things that can not only brighten their day, but brighten your day too. Expressing heartfelt admiration, appreciation, and affection is also something that can really improve your social relationships. It can build relationships, and it can improve your day. Active constructive listening is a very important technique. And the thing about active constructive listening is the work is being done by the listener. So as the listener, what you're looking for is something that was positive that happened to the person that's speaking. And then what you do is you listen and respond in such a way to help them relive that experience. You ask them for particulars. You say things like, that must have made you feel really good, or what happened next, or how did that start? You help bring them a deeper experience as they're telling you about something good that happened to them. Something else that works is reduce the use of email. If you could do something by an email, but a phone call would work, the phone is richer. You can hear tone of voice. If the phone would work, but a Zoom or an in-person meeting would work, go for the richer experience, the richer communication. And finally, propose and find work with people that you really enjoy, that you want to be with. All of these things will improve your social connections. And a quote that Steve has taught me is, you don't have to do it, where it is whatever you're trying to do, whatever your goals are. Or excuse me, you do have to do it, but you don't have to do it alone. You can do it with others that you enjoy.
Yeah, and Paul, that doing things with others is really something that contributes to our next element of PERMA, and that's M for meaning. So the M in PERMA stands for meaning. According to Seligman, the meaningful life involves belonging to and serving something bigger than the self. We know how important a sense of meaning is because self-reports of meaning are associated with higher quality of life and decreased mortality. People who report more meaning in their lives experience slower age-related cognitive decline and decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease. So how can we get more meaning in our lives? Well, some of the PERMA elements we've already considered actually add meaning to our lives. When we are socially connected, life feels more meaningful. When we are in a good mood, experiencing positive emotion, then life feels more meaningful. And when the world makes sense, we feel we have more meaning in our lives. So religious and spiritual beliefs can bring meaning to our lives. They give us the sense there is purpose in those ordinary events of our lives, along with the desire to help others. And when we reach out and help others, those actions, again, add meaning to our lives. And even when we're coping with traumatic events like the loss of a loved one or a serious illness, finding meaning in those events, like a newly expanded perspective on our lives, can really help us cope. So as you were going through this, there are ways to think about how you might interject a little more sense of meaning in your life. Take some time and reflect on your purpose. What has really added a sense of meaning and purpose to your life at this point? At this point, when you're transitioning from one career to another, is an opportunity to maybe see if they're still in alignment with what's really important. And if you go back and think about the experiences that really have brought you a sense of meaning, they might be spiritual, religious, family, work-related, or engagement and connection. Try to narrow that down to maybe 3 elements that have been really important to you. And then think about, how can I engage in activities on a day-to-day basis that would bring more of this sense of meaning into my life? A good way of doing that is to do what's called the best possible self-exercise. This is an exercise that has been validated numerous times. You can just Google it on the internet and you'll find that the instructions for it, they're very simple. You just simply take a few days and write down each day what your vision is of your life. If it just went as well as you could imagine, that you really achieve your life dreams. And as you go through that process, make sure that you think about, what are the steps that would get you there? What are those little goals along the way that would get you to your final destination? This has been shown to really help people become more optimistic about what their future may bring them.
And now we're on to the last element, which is accomplishment. And as you can see here from the picture that Steve brought us, even as children, we try and master our environment. We try and achieve things that may or may not even be possible. And a big part of that is about goals. Let's go back. There we go. Yes, a big part of that is about goals. And as Waldinger pointed out, when we're young, our goals tend to be extrinsic, tend to be things that bring us acknowledgement from outside of ourselves, things like power and money and fame. And as we mature, intrinsic goals become more important to us, typically. These are things that are authentic to us, that really speak to our desires and our needs. They provide fulfillment for us. They benefit from our wisdom, and they create more wisdom. And it's important to understand that there's less external validation from intrinsic goals. But it's been shown that intrinsic goals, these things that really speak to us, to our inner selves, increase happiness, fulfillment, and perseverance. And so, Steve, can you weave all this together?
Yes, thank you, Paul. And I really appreciate that you've brought up the question of moving from extrinsic goals to intrinsic goals. As we finish our discussion of happiness and well-being, I'd like to share an experience I had many years ago living in the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. At our school for mentally handicapped Navajos, we had foster grandparents teach our students how to weave. One way that Navajos have been able to contribute to the well-being of their families and communities is through the art of weaving. If we reflect on our life as a tapestry, with the warp, the strands that are stretched lengthwise being the elements of perma, and the weft, the threads that are woven through them and are made up by the choices we make each day about how to live our life, then we are creating a rich tapestry. At this point in your life, I'm suggesting you pause long enough to consider, who is the author of your composition? Does it emanate from your deepest values and passions? Or is it in part the result of influences from family, culture, habit, or chance? Now may be the time for you to take complete authorship of your composition. And I'm going to quote from a book about the silk weavers of the hill tribes of Laos. We each weave a life, don't we? I sit on the worn bench, the shuttle passes left, then right, like a pendulum. I weave the tasks I did not know I had chosen. How many of us weave from cradle to grave, never mindful of the growing cloth?
Thanks, Steve. And we've very carefully chose the word embellish. You can embellish your past. And the reason that we chose that word is because we can't change the parts of our tapestry that are in the past. We can't change what has happened, but we can embellish those. We can complete things that we feel weren't done. Go back and say thank you to someone, complete a relationship. We can also choose to do new things that that complement things that we've already done. So retirement really provides the opportunity to complete the tapestry of your life. And you can choose to be your best self.
So yes, Paul, the key, I think, is to think about those strands that you're weaving into your life and be a bit more conscious of how you choose on a day-to-day basis to reinforce some and maybe ignore others. And we think that will be beneficial for you in the long run.
We also invite you to be ambassadors for well-being. And hopefully you've gotten a flavor from this discussion that helping others is a great way to help yourself. So now that you know a little bit about PERMA and a little bit about well-being, how will you bring this to your family, to your colleagues, to your community? So that's a challenge for you. Please think of how you could be an ambassador for well-being.
And I would add, I'm glad you brought that up, because the importance, sometimes people think that this is being selfish, you're focusing just on yourself, but the benefits of doing this are not just to yourself, to your family, to those who you care and love about. So thank you for focusing on this, sharing this with others.
Yeah. So we've thrown an awful lot at you, and the classes that Steve and I have typically taught on PERMA last for 8 weeks. So there's an awful lot here. If you have questions and comments, please share them.
So thank you, Paul and Steve, both, for just an amazing presentation. I have lots of questions myself, but I just want to wait and let others chime in. Such great information, and I really love the way you guys have presented it, and especially the tapestry imaging. That is such a beautiful way to convey what you're talking about here, and the opportunity that still exists to embellish what's happened in the past.
Well, thank you.
I just want to mention really quickly, as you guys were talking about acts of kindness, thank you, Lisa Adkins. She posted a link where you can actually track your acts of kindness. It's called mykindnessapp.com, and she put it in the chat if anybody's interested. So I thought you guys might want to check that out, and just wanted you to make you aware of it. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. I'd like to invite everybody to turn your camera on so we can see everybody. It helps to create a sense of community by doing that as well. And you can either type your question into the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll try to call on you to be able to raise your hand. And don't worry, Paul and Steve will manage this for you guys behind the scenes. You just go hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a reaction mode. If you have the most current version of Zoom, it will be there. And if you click on reaction, you can raise your hand. And if you do want to ask a question, you'll need to unmute yourself. So with that, any questions? Lisa added that they're trying to reach 1 million acts of kindness, and they're very close. This was created by the Jennifer Reardon Foundation. I guess there are billboards all around the city showing the count of all the acts of kindness in New Mexico and Albuquerque. So that's exciting. So please post your questions, and I'll just kick it off with one question to you guys. What do you think is the most important aspect of the PERMA model? I mean, it all seems so important, but does something stand out?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I can jump in. Well, as I mentioned before, my personal feeling is that positive relationships are really crucial, and so much of the other elements really relate to having a positive relationship and engaging with others. And I think this sense of connection that we have as human beings, not just with people, but with a sense of having meaning and purpose and something beyond ourselves, is important. That I see that going on. Actually, Seligman uses a metaphor of having sort of a cockpit with different meters on it, and each one could be measuring one of these elements of PERMA, so that some people tend to focus more on one than another. My thought with Martin Seligman, he's very focused on meaning and purpose. He wanted to be a philosopher at one point. And other people and maybe not so much focused on positive emotion. He says he's somewhat of a grouch, although I think he likes to get more positive emotions. So I think it varies for individuals. I think it's sort of interesting to think, where have you tended to focus in those PERMA areas? Have you tended to focus very much in one area? Might it make sense to spread it out a little bit and have a more balanced view? I don't know. Paul, do you know if Seligman says something about trying to have a more balanced view, or what's your sense of that?
Actually, this is one of the more interesting aspects that I find in this particular study or course of study. The researchers basically say there isn't like Steve said, there isn't a recipe that works for everybody. So it's something that we have to look into and figure out for ourselves. So Steve, in terms of trying to balance these things, you need to figure out what the balance is for you.
Great.
Great question. I don't know if anybody's going to.
I'm just checking the chat to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one question from Mark in the chat.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on embellishing your past? Can you talk more about that concept of embellishment?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mark. So let's see. When people go through traumatic experiences, we've all heard about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and what they found is only about 25% of people, typically the people who catastrophize, are people who suffer from PTSD. About half of people, after a year, they're back to where they were, and the other 25% of people actually experience what's called post-traumatic growth. And that post-traumatic growth is often accompanied by or preceded by people taking that traumatic experience and reframing it, understanding that traumatic experience in a way that helps them find more meaning in their lives or helps them find something. And so that's a big part of what we mean about embellishing. If you're looking at something in the past that has happened, you can't change that, but you can change how you think about it. You can also change what you do now to complement that. If there was something that was missing or something that was really important to you, you can follow up on that. And so that's what we mean by embellishing. Steve, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would add the whole area of intervention called narrative therapy, where you help people change the narrative of their life. They may have a very negative cast on their life, and by getting some help, for instance, with a therapist, you can recast those events so that instead of being so negative, you can see that the positive aspects of a person's life, whether it's getting through difficult and challenging situations, surviving an abusive relationship, and so on. And I think there's also evidence that we can do some of that on our own by creating a sort of a new narrative for ourselves. thinking of, again, this best possible self exercise is really a nice one, where you think about how would it turn out if my life really, where I was able to accomplish those goals I want for myself. And just having thought that through brings people much more optimism and sense they can get there. And they can begin to get at what would that involve? What would be the steps I would need to take?
Great. So another comment was from Asia. She said, thank you for a nice presentation. It's very needed at this time. Wholeheartedly agree with that. And also for emphasizing that as people, we continue to make friends, even when we age, and our friends and family pass. And so maybe you can talk a bit about the importance of that, continuing to make friends and connecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's such an important aspect. I'm thinking of a neighbor whose mother I was always had many, many young friends. And as she got very elderly, she still had all these young friends who were visiting her. But it does mean you have to get into those areas of your life where you're engaging younger people. You're not getting isolated and just with a group of older folks, but you're really reaching out to make those connections. And that does take some initiative to find those opportunities. It may be through volunteering. You know, you volunteer for an organization. Maybe you're interested in a hobby or something like folk dancing. I know that's a great way to get connected with people of a wide range of ages. I think part of it, we can get segregated into these age communities. And I think that can really have a negative impact sometimes. So making sure we are able to reach out and make connection. I think it's just good for cognitive and mental development anyway, to have younger folks. And thanks for the seniors here today to help us with our challenges, you know, dealing with technology. And if you have those young friends who can do that and provide that assistance, maybe you can find ways of engaging and being more helpful in their lives.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate a little bit that on what Waldinger talked about, that it takes effort to replace your workmates with playmates. And as Steve pointed out, you need to make the effort of bringing younger people into your lives. So I think we have a question from Cynthia.
Cynthia.
I just want to say hello to Paula, my former workmate. And I was just going to give an example of reframing. So I think part of looking back at your memories is trying to bring meaning to the pain and trauma you've been through yourself. And as a young girl growing up in Washington, D.C., where in the 50s and 60s, where I was clearly a minority, I faced a lot of racism. My family faced a lot of racism. And that's something that I brought to my own life as one of my goals, is to work toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was formerly global chair of allies for LGBTQ employees at Oracle, where I worked, and I'm an ally. I went through my own pain of racism, and I want to see everybody included, regardless of your gender identity or sexual orientation. So that's one way that I've reframed my painful memories to do something that's meaningful now.
Right. And she is an incredible ally to several communities, both at Oracle and now that you've left Oracle, beyond that. So I see you out there doing this for all kinds of communities. So thank you for your allyship, Cynthia, and your example about how it feeds you and supports other communities. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. I was wondering if people were going to ask about, is this true? Is this just true of, one cultural group, or, doesn't apply to other cultures? But people like Seligman and Ed Diener have done research all around the world looking at what brings wellness and happiness. And although there are some differences depending on cultures, many of these major findings apply. There have been attempts to measure flourishing and wellness in different countries, like New Zealand has done this. and Great Britain. So it doesn't apply just to one cultural group. These are really important factors, although they may be exhibited differently in a different culture, they still remain very important.
Yeah, and it's one of the big reasons that one of the pathways that New Mexico New is going to work on is that social connection, because we realize just how important that is. Yes, there's learning events, and yes, there's ways to connect people to job and volunteer opportunities. And it's so important that people have a way to socially connect with one another, and that multi-generational connection especially. So yeah, great point.
Thanks, Paula. I mean, you guys are doing such great work. I mean, this fits so well with our model that it's such a delight to be able to share this with you, with all of you today.
We're definitely going to be looking further to partner with you guys, but we'll get to that in a minute. So another comment from Nancy. One of the last times she heard Seligman, he was speaking mostly of COVID time and emphasized positive emotions and finding opportunities to laugh, especially with other people. Any thoughts on how the PERMA model kind of plays into that? I love that idea of laughing. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that question. Is there any data specifically on laughter? Like, does that have more juice than other types of techniques? Because it seems to work for me if I can find some way to laugh or something to laugh. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know of any specific work on that, but that's definitely a way of savoring. That's kind of the savoring exercise. Another example of savoring. Steve?
Yeah, I think there's something called laughter therapy, where people get together and they laugh, and it really does have a major impact on elevating mood. You just think of all those PERMA elements you get when you get together like that. You know, you're making the connections, you're experiencing positive emotion, you're probably getting a sense of meaning and purpose, you know, and just that sense of, I'm not in here alone. I'm not trying to do this by myself. You know, it's, so important. And we know laughter is contagious.
Mm-hmm. And they have done studies. So there's also laughter yoga, but they have done studies where they've looked at physiological changes that accompany laughter, and things like the stress hormones are reduced when you laugh. So yeah, there are physiological changes that have been studied. I'm not sure about how that translates to mood though.
And I know there are some Qigong exercises that incorporate that intense laughter practice. And when you're doing it in a group, it especially has an impact. And even just thinking about today, you know, you're talking about connection. Here we all are on Zoom, which we've all had to navigate and learn over the last, year and a half. And I'm just noticing the difference in my heart space and the openness and the flow of what's happening as people actually do speak up and engage. And sometimes it's just a matter of being brave enough, I think, at least in my case, to actually, ask the question or to engage in the conversation. It really shifts your energy level that way, it seems. So just wanted to note that. And then read to you, Pamela, thank you for your comment. Any interest in sharing what you had to say with the group, Pamela? You can unmute if you don't mind. I know you, so I don't think you'll mind me calling you out.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to thank you for your presentation, because it's important in a world that's so polarized right now, and that it's important for our own self-care to think about time and patience, not only with ourselves, but with each other. And I love the fact that you brought up mindfulness and meditation. It's important to me. And as a lifelong meditator, I believe that the power of visualization in meditation creates a framework where we can create our day before it even happens. And it does involve a daily practice. And I know there is research around that, particularly just recently, but that short practice of 10 to 15 minutes is so valuable. So thanks for your presentation today.
Well, you're welcome, Pamela. And you were talking about, that question of how do we bridge the gap? How are we able to communicate with people who are sort of on the other side? And I think maybe thinking about these perma elements, maybe we could try to understand where this other person, a member of our family or a friend who really seems to be coming from a different perspective, these perma elements are going to be there. And if we can connect on that level, on a deeper level, and avoid the political issues and those factors, maybe that's a way for us to deepen our connection to each other. Because these are people who we care about often. They're members of our family. They're people who are down the block, our neighbors. So
Can I piggyback on that for a second? In terms of listening, you brought up listening, and active listening is so important. But I say especially as families start to get together for the holidays, listening to one's political viewpoints, bringing up these keys that you've mentioned today, and I think engaging one another and agreeing to disagree is so important. I really don't know that we can just give up our politics, but we can be more respectful of each other's differences. Maybe.
Thank you.
Act of kindness. Yeah.
That's a great point, and that does remind me that doing that is an act of kindness, which is one of the suggestions that we have.
Yeah, definitely. So just a note from, I hope I'm saying your name right, Alex King. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I apologize. But the comment is, thank you for this excellent presentation with concrete steps we can each take in our daily lives. And I think that's so important to point out, because we do get that feedback quite often with the presentations that we do, or I need actionable steps to take. And you guys have really provided some concrete steps today. Another comment from Larry. Is Larry still with us? Can we bring Larry up, Paula, if he's here? So Larry is a member of our board of directors, and very grateful to Larry, because it was because of Larry that we first met Steve. So thank you so much, Larry. And I'll let you read your comment or say your comment if you don't mind.
Well, I just agreed with a previous person that we saw some theory backed by known experts in the field, and then we heard practical examples. And for me, this is a very, very effective educational approach. And I just want to thank Dr. Poland and Dr. Smith. It's been great.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And thanks for making this possible. In fact, I want to thank the entire New Mexico New team. It's been great to work with all of you. This has been just a wonderful experience. So thank you. And thanks to all of you who are here participating.
Thank you so
much. I think we have a question from Mark.
We do. Are you unmuted, Mark?
I'm about to do so.
Okay.
I was typing into the chat, techniques for applying PERMA to retirement. I'm not a new retiree, I'm an older retiree. And I've spoken with lots and lots of people, especially men, it seems like. And I notice a limited number of men showed up for this. But they often will say things like, I just don't know what I'm going to be able to do if I retire. And it gets into this problem of which part of PERMA is best for you, or which parts are best for you, and how do you go about figuring that out? What are the techniques you can apply? And I was very impressed by first of all, the comment that one of you made, Steve or Paul, of shifting your focus from extrinsic matters to intrinsic matters. I never thought of that idea, because so often that's what people do when they say, I don't know what I'm going to do and retire. They're focusing all on this extrinsic stuff that they've experienced in their lifetime. And here's a chance to look at something really different. And what are the skills? And somebody else mentioned it, and I think Barbara Fredrickson is a very good person to express that also, and that is slowing down, and that's where the mindfulness comes in. And mindfulness is a daily way of being. Meditation is a practice, and both of them in tandem are techniques I think a lot of people don't think of when they're up against retiring. They figure, oh gosh, got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And being contemplative about it is a whole different way of looking at it. And the guidelines you guys have been providing here, I think are really remarkable. And I hope that they can be made available easily for people who are going into retirement.
Definitely.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
and just to mention, Mark, this morning I emailed everyone a list of resources. It was a document attached to the email you received this morning as your reminder. So there's some great resources on that document if you want to check that out. And then I believe Ellen had a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been wonderful because I'm relatively newly retired. And I keep saying, especially Tammy hears this all the time, I'm like, you go to high school and they teach you stuff and you're ready for college. Then you go to college and you come out of there and you're ready for that part of your life. And you retire. And the first thing, of course, we all want to do is we just want to have fun, right? So you go through that. I'm just going to have fun. I'm not going to worry. I'm going to sleep in, whatever that is. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, that was great. Now what? I feel like I'm at the edge of the cliff here. And where do I go next? And everything that you talked about, it sounds like the course, like you mentioned, you have a 6 to 8 week course. I'm like, that's the next course. That's where you go when you retire. So you get that information and then you can, jump off from that point. And I love the way you presented it. I love that there's structure and there's the kind of philosophy and the psychology of it. And then the actual, action you can take to get you there. Because I've been kind of wallowing. I'm like, what do you do next? Right? What is it? And how do I get there? So anyway, I'm super interested in your course. So I just wanted to mention that and make sure that we have some information about that for everybody, if anybody's interested.
Oh, that's great, Ellen. Thank you very much. And let's see, I hesitate a little bit, but I'm going to jump in anyway. We're already talking with Tammy and Paula about finding ways to get materials that Steve and I and others who are involved in an organization called the Center for Applied Positive Psychology, which Steve and I are both members of. And by the way, don't look for this on the web. It's not an official organization. This is just a community of practice. We get together once a week. And if anyone would like to join that conversation, we'd be glad to have you. But we've done things like develop textbooks, a workbook. We've developed training materials. And we'll be working with Tammy and Paula and the New Mexico New group to get those on the website and make those available. So I'm glad this is resonating with all of you, and there will be more opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Definitely figure that out.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ellen. Any other thoughts or questions? Comments? Love to hear from everybody today. We're not going to be together probably for a little bit, hopefully in January sometime. So between now and then, we'll definitely be working, talking with both of you guys about how to get some of that material available to our audience. We're hoping that once we get our app and our platform, we call it a hub, launched in 2022, that this is exactly the kind of thing we want to be able to offer to new elders in New Mexico, age 50 plus, is that social platform where you can engage with other community conversations and do things like go to these gatherings that you guys have on a weekly basis on this particular topic of psychology. So anything else anyone would like to add? I just want to give everybody one more opportunity. Or Steve or Paul?
I'll let Kay go and then I'll say something.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I know what was brought up was that it's very difficult when people have strong feelings that are very different and how to approach that. And I think Steve had mentioned some of the PERMA values. If you can find something in common with someone, it's nice to be able to try to connect with them in some way first, but also if they have a different opinion, I think possibly if they say something that might be offensive and you can ask them, I'm trying to understand that. Can you explain? Can you tell me what, you've probably had different experiences. And if you're actually listening to them, you can respectfully at the end say, oh, well, I hadn't thought of that. My experiences were different, and just doing the listening instead of arguing. And I think it connects with some of the things that you have said too. So thank you. And it's an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thank you, Gay. And you're absolutely right that being curious, I heard a good quote recently: when I'm furious, get curious. So yeah, if you can be curious and if you can ask people to explain how they came to the views that they have, it can really help with the building of relationships.
Thanks, Gay. That was great.
I just want to highlight something. I said I had to listen while I was doing things. I've got my little girl with me today. And I loved what you said about savoring the good moments. And I was thinking, like, for those of you who have read the 5 Love Languages book, I don't know if you're familiar, but my love language is words of affirmations. And I would never have known that had I not read that book. And it speaks so much to me now on almost a daily basis. Like my best friend, he's a man who lives on the East Coast. We talk every day, and he's rare to compliment anything or anyone. And on the occasions when he does say something like, Trish, I just wanted you to know the impact you've had on my life. I always think of this as, I literally write it down so that I can save it in my little inspiration file. And it's like my file that I keep for when clients say great things about our teen years, for when people say great things about our team. Like I keep an electronic file in my Gmail, and I keep one like a physical file, because I love having that stuff to look back on when I clean up my desk and I'm just like, I remember those affirming words of the work we do, or the affirming words of the impact that I've had on someone, or things like that. And I'm just like, that speaks so much to what you were saying, because I didn't realize that was, like a psychological trait of replenishing our happiness and keeping our joy. And that makes so much sense to me, savoring that and then asking people to expand on it when they've had a great moment. It was beautiful.
That's great. What a great example. Thank you.
I just want to call out Trish. Trish is the founder of Teen Years. So we love partnering with you guys, and I'm so grateful that you're here and for what you're doing. And if you guys don't know about Teen Years, you can go to their website. It's just teenyears.com, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And they actually have wonderful courses and all kinds of information available to people. So check them out for sure with that multi-generational approach to connecting teen years and people age 50 plus. So Trish, thank you for your work.
Yeah, this is the first experience that Steve and I have had to work with them, and Dylan has been just great. So yeah, we highly recommend them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dylan. She just posted in chat the information to get in touch with them. So Wonderful. Anything else? Just dive in. If you have a question or comment, would love to hear from everybody. All right, well, Paul and Steve, I'll give you a few minutes to wrap things up if you like. Any final comments?
I just want to say again, thank you to everyone at New Mexico New for allowing us this opportunity. It's been a great learning experience, a lot of fun for me, and I'm really pleased that we've made this connection. Steve?
Yeah, similar thing for me, and for me, it's an opportunity to flourish. I mean, when working with Paul, it's been such a delight. And my sense always is I do things by myself, but often when I do them with someone else, it adds new dimensions, things I wouldn't see if I did it by myself. So I've been so appreciative, and I want to thank you, Paul, for doing that. And I also want to thank all the people who've shown up. It's kind of lonely if we're up here and nobody else is around. And you've taken the time and you've engaged. To me, that means you're making an effort to move in the kinds of directions we're talking about. It's not an easy time, obviously, with this COVID situation. And Zoom is not the probably best way to do this. But, for all of the handicaps, I think we're showing that you can flourish even under these kinds of conditions. So thank you all for making this possible. I think noted something, you have to do it, but you don't have to do it by yourself.
That's right.
Much.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This has been a really wonderful way to end our 2021 event season, and we're excited about what's going to come next. I do want to mention that these events are made possible free of charge because of the amazing sponsors that we have. That includes AARP of New Mexico, French Funerals, Cumulus Media, One Albuquerque Senior Affairs, Presbyterian, and Nusenda. So we really appreciate our sponsors. We're so grateful. If anybody out there knows of people who would be willing to support these kinds of programs, please let us know. And next slide, Paula, if you would. I just want to remind everybody that there are resources available. They're in your email with the email that was sent out this morning. If you did not get that, feel free to shoot me an email at info@nm-new.org and I can resend it. Here's the book that was mentioned by Martin Seligman, Flourish, just to remind you guys about the resources available. And then also, if you have ideas or want to learn about something in particular, we would love to know about it. So you can either send us an email or put something in chat today. And we invite your ideas. We're looking at doing some wellness programs, maybe something around food as medicine, starting next year, and tying that into foods that are available in New Mexico. We're going to talk, I think, a little bit about caregiving. That's such a huge need, probably sometime next spring. So we're developing that event calendar now. So if you have ideas, bring them on. We would love to hear about it. So looking to the future, again, I mentioned the app and the hub that we're trying to develop earlier. Our goal for 2022 is to make that available to New Mexicans. So we're facing some pretty serious issues in New Mexico. By 2030, over 30% of New Mexico's population will be age 65 or older. 1 in 4 New Mexicans will retire into poverty, and 70% of New Mexicans who are age 65 plus must continue working to supplement their fixed incomes. And this is important for us to get this initiative off the ground because we're one of the only non-governmental organizations focusing on this issue. We're certainly not the only one, and we do want to collaborate with others. We're not in competition. We're here to work together to really support New Mexico's new elders. So we appreciate your support. Thank you for coming to our programs. Our fundraising, this is the time of the year we're trying to reach our fundraising goals. We still have a little ways to go this year, but we've got some time. So if anyone would like to make a donation, that would be greatly appreciated. Or if you know of an organization who would like to support our initiatives, again, please just reach out to us. We do have a funding challenge. I just want to mention it to those of you here. We have a very special donor who has supported New Mexico New from the beginning, and she has just given us a $10,000 donation, and she's challenging everyone in the community who is able to match that donation. We would love to have a $10,000 or more match by the end of this year. And even though, not everybody's able to do that, I'm certainly one of those people myself. I wish I could give a $10,000 match too, but I try to give as much time as I can and go above and beyond. And I'm just saying that because it doesn't matter, even if people have in-kind donations to give, money to help support developing our app, or any way that you can support the initiatives of NMNU, all are greatly appreciated. So thank you for your time and attention and for letting me share that with you guys. Thank you to our donor. And of course, happy Thanksgiving. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.